She thought she'd sail away with him, while I stayed back, broken. But what she didn't know was that I was already on board, standing right behind them, with his fiancée. She planned her fairy tale. I brought her reality. And karma? It set sail the moment she did. If you believe betrayal always finds its way back, hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more. I still remember the way the ocean smelled that morning, soft, clean, almost sweet, like the world itself was waiting to give us a new beginning. I'd been planning this cruise for months. Not just any trip. This was supposed to be our trip. The kind of trip people talk about years later. The kind that becomes a story passed down. A reset button. A reminder of how much we still meant to each other. Sienna had been distant for weeks. I told myself it was work, stress, life piling up the way it sometimes does. But deep down, a quieter part of me had already started collecting the silences. I ignored it. I kept telling myself love was louder. So, I poured everything into making this perfect. I worked extra hours, picked the best suite on the ship, even arranged for her favorite wine to be waiting on the table when we'd step into the cabin. I imagined the way she'd smile when she saw it. I'd played that moment in my head more times than I'd like to admit. That morning, as I zipped up the suitcase, I caught myself grinning like a fool. I was nervous. The good kind. The kind that comes from believing in something so fiercely that doubt doesn't even get a seat at the table. I wanted us to feel new again. I wanted her to remember what we used to be. Then, the sound that split that perfect morning in half, a simple ding from her phone. She'd left it charging on the counter. I wasn't the kind of man who snoops. Not really. But it wasn't curiosity that made me look. It was instinct. A quiet voice that said, "Lucan, something isn't right." What I saw wasn't just a text. It was a betrayal wrapped in casual words. "Can't wait to watch the sunrise with you," it said. And right under it, in his name, not mine. My hands froze, still gripping the edge of the counter. My heartbeat climbed into my throat, pounding so hard it almost drowned out the sound of my own breathing. For a moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt hollow, like someone had quietly unzipped the life I knew, and everything inside just spilled out. Then, slowly, that emptiness made room for something colder, sharper. I realized this wasn't just any trip for her either. She was going to take my plan, my dream, and live it with someone else. That was the moment love turned into a weapon. Not mine, hers. But she had no idea I was about to take it back. The message didn't end with a single line. It was a thread, a story I was never meant to read. I stood there, fingers hovering over the screen, torn between putting the phone down and knowing everything. But once a crack appears, the light, or the truth, has a way of forcing its way in. And the truth didn't knock politely. It kicked the door down. I scrolled. Each message was a quiet knife. "Can't wait to be away from everything. He'll never know. It's just you and me on the ocean. They were planning my cruise." Every surprise I'd set up, every romantic detail I thought would save us, she'd shared it with Rowan like it was hers to give. They laughed about it, called it their secret. She even told him how I'd never see it coming. I could feel the heat climbing up my neck. My chest tightened, like the walls around me had moved in closer. I tried to breathe, but the air felt too thick to pull in. I read every word. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to. Betrayal isn't just about a moment. It's about watching everything you believed in crack, layer by layer. While you're still standing in the same room, pretending the floor isn't splitting beneath your feet, I remembered the late nights she brushed me off with tired excuses. The work dinners. The sudden gym sessions that didn't match her old routine. I'd ignored it all. Love had made me soft. Trust had made me blind. But now, each excuse lined up in my head like puzzle pieces clicking into place too perfectly. She hadn't just drifted away. She'd walked out long before I even noticed. I found their itinerary hidden in plain sight in her emails. She used my booking to change passenger details. Her and Rowan. Not me. She didn't even bother canceling my name. She was going to let me find out after they'd already set sail. I think that's what hurt the most. Not just that she cheated, but that she didn't even flinch doing it. I sat down at the edge of the bed, the phone still in my hand. I wasn't shaken anymore. The first wave of heartbreak had already burned through me. What replaced it wasn't rage, not yet. It was clarity. A clean, almost frightening kind of calm. I whispered to myself, barely louder than a breath. You wanted a perfect cruise, Sienna? Fine, you'll get it. Just not the way you planned. And right then, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about what happens when betrayal meets consequence. The moment the calm settled over me, everything became quiet, not peaceful sharp. Like the silence right before a storm tears the sky apart. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break anything. That would have given her power over my pain. No. I decided I'd give her something far worse, truth, served ice cold. I opened my laptop. If Rowan was going to be on that ship with her, I needed to know who he was. It didn't take long. People who cheat always leave digital fingerprints. I found his social profiles, pieced together his life like a puzzle, and there it was, a tagged photo. He wasn't single. He wasn't free. He was engaged. Her name was Callista Wren. They looked picture perfect in their engagement announcement. The kind of smile that tells the world forever. Seeing that almost made me laugh. My wife had thrown away everything real for a man who was already promising forever to someone else. It was cruel, but it was also poetic. I found Callista's contact through a mutual tag on his page. I stared at the message box for a long time before typing a single line. I think we need to talk. It's about Rowan and the cruise, she replied faster than I expected. At first she was defensive, suspicious even. But the moment I sent screenshots of their messages, the conversation changed. Her replies came slower after that. The kind of slow that happens when someone's world starts tilting. I didn't have to explain much. She saw enough. We agreed to meet the next morning. I still remember how composed she looked when she walked in. Calm on the outside, but her eyes. They were holding a storm. She listened to every word, not interrupting once. And then she said something that stuck with me. If they want to play us for fools, let's give them a show. There was no rage in her voice, just certainty. And in that moment, I realized we were on the same side of a twisted mirror. Two people who'd loved deeply and got burned for it. But instead of letting it break us, we were about to turn their little fantasy into their biggest nightmare. I didn't want to humiliate her. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal she handed me like it was nothing. She had no idea her cruise was still on, just not in the way she imagined. Because now, Rowan's fiancé was coming too. And so was I. Boarding day felt nothing like I'd imagined when I first booked the trip. It should have been filled with excitement, her hand in mine, the sound of waves greeting us. Instead, it was calm on the surface and electric underneath, like standing on a live wire without flinching. I watched from a distance as Sienna arrived with Rowan. She was wearing the dress I'd bought her 2 months ago for this very cruise. The one she'd said she wanted to save for a special moment. Here she was, laughing, letting him hold her hand like it belonged to him. She looked weightless, free, a woman who believed she'd pulled it off. For a second, a part of me, the old, soft part, almost flinched. But then I remembered the messages. The way my name had been erased from her plans like I never existed. That softness burned away in an instant. I straightened my jacket, felt the quiet thump of my heart settle into a steady rhythm, and stepped toward the check-in. Callista walked beside me. We didn't need to speak. There was something about shared betrayal that built a silent understanding. She wasn't there to cause a scene. Neither of us were. We were there to let the truth walk right up to them. We reached the dock just as they handed their boarding passes to the staff. Rowan's laugh was loud, careless. Sienna tucked her hair behind her ear in that familiar way I used to love. But the moment her eyes lifted and found me, everything stilled. Her smile didn't fade slowly. It collapsed. One heartbeat, she was radiant. The next, she looked like the air had been yanked out of her lungs. Her grip slipped from Rowan's hand. I didn't say a word. I just met her eyes and held them there. No rage, no begging. Just a quiet, sharp kind of knowing. And then Rowan turned to... The second he saw Callista, his face drained of all that fake charm. It was almost poetic the way the lies collided head-on without warning. We walked past them, side by side, handing over our boarding passes like nothing was out of place. But everything was. You could almost feel the panic rising in the air behind us. The ship hadn't even left the harbor yet, but their perfect little escape had already started to sink. And the best part? All we had to do was show up. The first night on the ship was a study in silent tension. You could almost taste it in the air, thick, heavy, ready to shatter at the slightest push. Sienna avoided my gaze the entire evening, pretending to be busy, pretending everything wasn't crashing down around her. Rowan tried to play it cool, but his hands fidgeted every time Callista's eyes lingered on him too long. It was almost amusing. They'd boarded a fantasy, but reality had reserved a seat at their table. Dinner on the cruise was formal, polished, staged like a performance. Everyone was dressed in their best, laughter echoing through the dining hall. And right there, in the center of all that elegance, was our table. For people bound by two lies, I didn't have to say much. I didn't need to. Every glance, every unspoken word hung between us like a fuse waiting to be lit. Callista sat across from Rowan, perfectly composed. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Sienna sat stiff, her fingers gripping the napkin like it could save her from drowning. And me? I was calm. To calm, because I already knew Karma was about to walk in wearing no disguise. Callista started it, gently, almost sweetly. She asked Rowan how work had been the past few weeks, how those late nights at the office had gone. He stumbled. Words tripped over themselves. She tilted her head, the kind of tilt that says, "Go on, dig your own grave." His lies cracked like thin ice. Sienna's eyes shifted toward him, searching for something steady and finding nothing. Then I leaned forward, my voice low and even. "You know, it's funny. I booked this cruise months ago. For me and my wife, but it seems you two got here first." The table went silent. Not just our table. The ones around us too. It's strange how betrayal makes people watch, even strangers. Rowan's face turned pale. Sienna's lips parted, but no sound came out. And then Callista slid her engagement ring across the table like it was a final punctuation mark. "I think you can keep this," she said. It was Sienna who broke first. A slap cracked through the dining hall sharp. Clean, loud. Right across Rowan's cheek. People gasped. He stared at her like the ground had opened beneath him. I leaned back, letting it all unravel. I didn't need to lift a finger. They had built this storm themselves. Karma was just giving it a microphone. After the slap, the dining hall fell into a silence so sharp it felt like a glass had shattered in midair. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the ocean outside, distant, endless, indifferent. Sienna stood frozen, her hands still hanging in the air, as if even she couldn't believe what she'd just done. Rowan stared at her with wide, stunned eyes, one hand pressed against his reddening cheek. And then everything cracked. Sienna turned toward me, her voice trembling but desperate. "Lucan, please, I can explain." Her words came fast, tangled, the way lies often do when they've finally run out of places to hide. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let her hear the sound of her own panic. Because sometimes silence is louder than a scream. She reached for me across the table like distance could be undone with a gesture. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I was going to tell you," I laughed. "Not the kind that's warm or forgiving. A quiet, empty kind of laugh. When after the cruise, when the two of you came back, sun-kissed and smiling, her face crumpled. Tears spilled, but they weren't the kind that moved me anymore. They were the kind people shed when they finally realized they've lost control of the story. She wasn't crying because she loved me. She was crying because she'd been caught." Across from us, Callista rose from her chair. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply took the ring Rowan had once given her, held it between two fingers, and let it drop onto the table with a soft click. That sound was quieter than Sienna's pleading, but it was the only sound that truly mattered. "Rowan," she said calmly, I don't chase people who build their future on lies." Then she walked away, leaving him in the wreckage he created. Rowan tried to follow, but Sienna stopped him, not to hold on, but to lash out. The two of them exploded in a flurry of accusations, their voices echoing through the room like thunder. I watched them tear into each other, the same way they'd torn through me without a second thought. And me? I stood up slowly. No yelling, no begging, no looking back. Their chaos was no longer mine to carry. For the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. The mask of love had fallen off, and what stood in front of me wasn't my wife anymore. It was just the woman who'd chosen someone else and lost everything. When I stepped out of that dining hall, the air on the deck felt different, cooler, cleaner, like the storm inside had passed and left the world rinsed in something new. The sky was dark, but the horizon carried a faint line of silver where the moonlight touched the ocean. It was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship slicing through the water. For the first time in weeks, I could actually breathe. Behind me, their shouting still echoed faintly through the corridor, Sienna and Rowan tearing each other apart, drowning in the mess they built, but that noise no longer belonged to me. It was a storm I didn't have to survive anymore. I leaned against the railing, hands steady, chest rising evenly. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't burning. I was done. Sienna came running after me a few minutes later. Her mascara was smeared, her hair a tangled mess. She wasn't the woman who boarded the ship all smiles and secrets. She looked smaller now, defeated. Her voice cracked as she said my name. "Lucan, please. I made a mistake." Mistake. Such a soft word for something that felt like being gutted. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Not with anger, just finality. "No," I said quietly. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." She froze at that, and I think that's when it hit her. This wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about fixing anything. This was the end. And endings aren't loud. They're quiet, almost gentle, like a door closing softly behind you. I looked at her one last time, not the way I used to. Not with love or pain, but with clarity. This trip could have been ours, but you gave it to someone else. And now, you can live with that. She cried harder, but her tears no longer reached me. There's a strange kind of power in walking, away not out of pride, but out of peace. I turned back toward the ocean, letting the wind push against me, letting it carry the weight she'd left behind. Callista appeared a little later. She didn't say anything, just stood beside me, both of us wrapped in quiet. We weren't allies anymore. We were simply two people who'd chosen to stand on the side of truth. That was enough. As the sun began to rise over the dark water, I whispered to myself, I didn't lose her. She lost me, and that was the real victory.